Hello and welcome to the Scoreboard Podcast. I'm your host, Rivka Boord of Jets X Factor, bringing you the best New York Jets content on the internet. I am sorry for being so late. Once again, I'm having major mic issues. Bought a new mic. It didn't work. So I'm stuck again with the earphones. I'm sorry that my audio is so bad. I'm still working on it. I appreciate anyone who joined. Hi, John. Thanks for joining. So this is my first time going live completely by myself. This could end up being a very short live. I didn't necessarily plan it out like I normally do. But I figured I would come live and just talk a little bit about the Jets defensive tackles because, people talk about the Jets defense and they just maybe make an assumption that the defense is going to be just as good as it was last year. And in many ways, there's every reason to expect that. I mean, you have Quinnen Williams returning, you have Sauce Gardner returning, Quincy Williams, CJ Mosley, DJ Reed, Jermaine Johnson, but, Hassan Reddick joining the group. That's a very good, certainly a very good basis for a defense. But if there's one spot on the defense that's not being talked about enough, people talk about the safeties. But if there's one spot on the defense that's not being talked about enough as an issue, it is defensive tackle behind Quinnen. And I think with the safeties, I've been critical of the Jets safeties for a few years now. But the thing about their safeties is that their defense has managed to be really good, even without having great safety play. But at defensive tackle next to Quinnen in 2022, they had Sheldon Rankins, who had a pretty good season. And in 2020, you saw the difference in the games that Rankins was out. And then in 2023, you saw what happened with Quinton Jefferson and Al Woods. And then you saw the sort of how the run defense declined when Woods was off the field. The pass rush declined when Jefferson was off the field. And so the Jets didn't really do a good job of replacing either Jefferson or Woods. And it's just something to be concerned about. Now, a lot of Jet fans are putting plenty of stock in Javon Kinlaw. And this is the truth about Javon Kinlaw. Kinlaw is not... He's, look, whatever you want to say, former first-round bust, Saleh knows how to develop defensive linemen. Most of the defensive linemen he's developed are not defensive tackles. And I know I've heard even the people at Jets X Factor don't agree with me. But if you think about it, yes, I know Quinnen broke out under Saleh, and I'll definitely give him credit for that, him and Ulbrich. But they haven't really been known for taking, first-round busts or guys who underachieved in a previous spot and suddenly getting, much better performance out of them. Some people would say Quinton Jefferson played better last year than he did in his previous years in Seattle. His pressure rate was slightly better, but it wasn't that much better. He had been just kind of very underrated in Seattle. And then when you talk about Woods was the same run stuffer with the Jets that he was with Seattle. You talk about Rankins before that. If anything, Rankins was a better pass rusher with New Orleans. And he was a better pass rusher with Houston last year, with Houston last year. And so if you think about it from that perspective, the Jets don't really necessarily, even Solomon Thomas, I've heard people say, he played better last year than he did with the 49ers. Not entirely true. He played better last year than he did in his first year with the 49ers, but not necessarily. He played about to the standard that you would have expected with him from San Francisco. And so looking at it from that perspective, I don't think you can expect Kinlaw to be any better than he was with San Francisco. And remember, Saleh was the one who drafted him, but Saleh was also the one who didn't develop him. And so, and Saleh is also the one who didn't develop Solomon Thomas in San Francisco. So from that perspective, it's like I don't expect more from Kinlaw than what we saw in San Francisco. And what we saw in San Francisco just wasn't very impressive. His pass rushing numbers were okay. They were slightly above average. But when you watch a film, and I wrote an article about this recently. You watch a film, he just was not impressive. He could never beat a double team, which I understand. Okay, a lot of defensive tackles can't beat double teams, but he can never beat a double team. If he's double teamed, it's the end. And just in terms of winning cleanly, he doesn't win cleanly that often. He cleans up on sacks just like Solomon Thomas does. And so if that's the case, they're playing $7.3 million, and the other one they're paying $3 million, and they're about the same caliber player. Both of them are bad run defenders. If anything, Kinlaw's worse than Thomas because at least Thomas has the speed to catch up from the backside of a play, whereas Kinlaw, a lot of times just rushes upfield with abandon. They're both very bad run defenders. And Kinlaw he's just not that impressive. And when you think about it, then now you have Kinlaw and Thomas. Thomas is fine for a backup defensive tackle, but he's going to play 35 to 40% of the snaps, which is much more than a typical backup in another team. And then when you think about, I think it's pronounced Lecky, even though I've heard everyone say Leaky. I heard Robert Saleh say Lecky Fotu. He's basically a much worse version of Al Woods. Like, you watch him and he's 330 pounds, but he certainly doesn't play like he's 330 pounds. People always think of 330 pounds guys as, big run stuffer. I don't know. He can be moved around in the run game like any other defensive tackle you've ever seen. Like any Jets defensive tackle you've seen is 290 pounds. They talk about like John Franklin Myers couldn't stop the run from the inside because he was being bullied by guards. Well, Fotu does the same thing at 330 pounds. So maybe he's more athletic than Woods, but he doesn't have much to show for it as a pass rusher, and he's not the run stuffer that Woods is. And so just from the interior defensive line next to Quinnen, or when Quinnen is off the field, is a significant issue. In terms of saying a double team is a win for a D lineman, that's not entirely true, in that interior defensive linemen very often get double teamed. Now, when Quinnen Williams is on the field, he's the one getting double teamed, so the other defensive tackle is going to be free. But the thing is, if you think about it, especially with a team like the Jets that doesn't blitz a lot, usually it's 5 offensive linemen on 4 defensive linemen. That means that there's going to be someone available for a double team. Usually that's going to be the guard and center on Quinnen, and then the edges and the other defensive tackle will get a single team. But first of all, none of their other guys are that impressive even against singles. And second of all, when Quinnen is off the field, they can double Kinlaw. It's not a win when you're rushing 4 down linemen to have a defensive tackle doubled. Yes, I guess it's a win in the sense that you don't have the edge rusher doubled, and it could very well be that they'll just double Reddick because that they're not afraid of what Kinlaw or Thomas or Fotu can do. That's certainly possible. You might see Reddick seeing more double teams if he's not on the field together with Quinnen. But yeah, I mean, again, most defensive tackles face double teams at least a portion of the time, and neither Thomas nor Kinlaw can beat them at all. It's like they're total zeros against double teams, especially in the run game, which is a big problem when Quinnen's not on the field, because again, you double team one of them, they're like move 5 yards out of the way, and then it opens up a big lane, and you're relying a lot on the linebackers to cover for the defensive lineman's mistakes. And as good as Mosley is against the run, and as good as Quincy can be against the run, they're not going to be able to hold up when with wide open holes all the time. It's why we've seen the Jets over the last 2 years. Their stats were mediocre, but there were games where it's just like the opponent is gashing them up the middle, and it doesn't seem to make sense with Quinnen Williams, who's one of the best, if not the best, run defending defensive tackle in the league. But it's because what's next to him is usually like a sieve, totally, pretty bad. Taylor, you say Woods and Jefferson could not last a full season. We got younger, and more athletic. So first of all, both of their injuries, I mean, again, Woods tearing an Achilles has nothing to do with his age. And again, Jefferson played, 14, 15 games? So yeah, the fact that he got hurt at the end of the season, he played most of the year. So, and Kinlaw's athleticism compared to Jefferson is totally irrelevant if it means that he's a worse pass rusher and just as bad of a run defender. And he essentially is. He's a much worse pass rusher than Quinton Jefferson. So athleticism only carries you so far. If it doesn't produce results on the field, that means nothing. And the same thing applies to Fotu. Yes, it's very nice to have athleticism, but if you're looking for someone who's stout in the run game, Fotu is not your guy. And if you're looking for someone who's a good pass rusher, Fotu is also not your guy. So athleticism, again, you want your 40-time freaks. Your RAS score freaks. I'm sorry. Like Solomon Thomas had a 971, 9.71, but he's just not that good of a player. That's exactly why he was a first-round bust. And Kinlaw, I don't think had a RAS score because he was drafted in 2020 in the COVID year. But the thing is, he probably would have scored extremely well too at 324 pounds. But again, he was a bust at number 14. And so I don't see the athleticism as inherently a positive when you're talking about the loss of actual results on the field. Now, jet it out, you're correct. Kinlaw Sonnen was a coach having obsession with former players he's familiar with on his former team. And I honestly criticize Saleh very heavily for that, because it's one thing to go after a guy on your old team who was good, but it's another thing to go after a guy on your old team, pay him double the amount of money he's worth, give him a starting spot on your team to replace a player who was extraordinarily productive. Like, just the whole picture doesn't make sense. And yes, it could be that the Jets defense will be none the worse for wear as a whole, because again, they hope to, we've written in the last couple of months between Michael Nania and me, both of us, we have written countless articles about the Jets run defense and how it might not really matter, because again, if they have a better pass rush, if they play with more leads, again, if they play with more leads, they're going to face more passes. They faced the third lowest pass rate in the league last year. Again, if they're ahead and it's pass rush only situations, it just won't matter that much. Again, the 49ers were one space below the Jets in run defense DVOA last year, and it didn't even matter. Their defense was fourth, which was one space behind the Jets too. But again, part of the reason that their run defense didn't matter is because they faced the fewest rushing attempts per game. So yes, when you face very few rushing attempts, it can mask a run defense that's not amazing. And again, the 49ers had Kinlaw in the middle, although Kinlaw played 69% of his snaps against the pass last year. But they still had Kinlaw in the middle. They also had Javon Hargrave is not a great run defender, so they were able to mask it also without a great, they didn't necessarily have a Quinnen Williams in the middle, and they were still able to mask it. And so in that sense, yes, perhaps they will be able to mask it, but it could definitely be a concern. Playing Miami, the team that ran all over everyone. I know people talk about their pass game, but they ran for over, 167 yards against the Jets. I know some of it was in garbage time, but if you watch the plays, like it was definitely a concern. It's definitely an issue. And the interior line is definitely part of it. Now, Miami gets a lot of its yardage on tosses, and that's not necessarily the defensive tackles. That's more about linebacker leverage and let's say the edge defenders doing a good job, stringing out the run. And again, the safeties closing ground well, and the cornerbacks, again, a lot of it is linebackers taking on blocks well and edge defenders stringing out the runs as much as possible. And so, again, it could be that it won't matter, but to me, even if it doesn't matter, the process is terrible here. And that's what I really, really knock Saleh and Douglas for. It's like, it was one thing when it was Laken Tomlinson, where everyone just thought it was a good move because they thought Laken was a good player. And, again, you could say he was overrated with San Francisco, but there was no reason to expect him to be as bad as he was with the Jets. Again, it was one thing when it was Quan Alexander, who you're paying him whatever they were paying him, like $1.25 million. So you bring him in, and he's not supposed to be a good run defender. He happened to have been better against the run that year than you would have imagined from previous years. But it's another thing when you bring in, and it's even one thing when you bring in Solomon Thomas and you pay him a couple of $1 million to be a backup defensive tackle. That's one thing. It's another thing to bring in a former first-round bust, a guy who couldn't stay healthy his first few years, terrible run defender, not a great pass, not a very twitchy pass rusher, a lot of wasted movement, doesn't really have good hand movement, hand placement, plays very high, things like this. To bring him in and pay him $7.25 million and basically in that way guarantee him a starting job, very, very stupid move, regardless of how it works out. And so Sluggo, yeah, our run D concerns me until I see it. The passing D with pass rush and pass defense is no concern to me. I agree. I'm always concerned about the defense, because I feel like defense is so, like, even if a defense is really good, there's just the NFL so favors offenses nowadays that it's really hard to keep it up. And look, from a fan perspective, I always want to see Sauce Gardner remain the best cornerback in the league. So I don't want him to be beaten. I don't want to see DJ Reed beaten for touchdowns. But as a whole, I'm not overly concerned about their pass rush, their pass defense. I'm a little concerned that their pass rush could take a step back if Will McDonald doesn't live up to his potential, but I'm very optimistic about his potential. So in that sense, I'm not overly concerned about their pass rush. The biggest thing I'm concerned with, as you said, is the run defense. And it's because, again, they didn't get the run stuffer in the middle, and their other defensive tackles are atrocious against the run, besides Quinnen. And it's an issue. It's definitely something that could be a big issue. Now you say, Gyro, thank you. But you say the running back slice through our linebackers easily. Yes and no. I'll tell you what, I think Mosley is still a very solid run defender at his age. He tends to fill gaps pretty well. Look, there are times where you see him, and obviously he didn't didn't react quickly enough or things like that. But overall, he's a pretty good run defender. When it comes to Quincy Williams is boom or bust. So Quincy will make an amazing play in the backfield, and the next play he'll overrun a play and let the running back get through the middle, or he won't be able to just lower his shoulder and maintain leverage so that he's not blocked out of a play. But overall, the Jets linebackers are still good run defending linebackers. They are not the main reason why the Jets run defense is porous. The main reason for their run defense, I mean, to a certain extent, you could say yes, the Jets play nickel at one of the highest rates in the NFL. Now, they did play big nickel a decent amount last year, but Michael Carter was also on the field a significant amount, maybe more than other nickel corners. And the thing is, again, when you have a nickel corner on the field instead of a linebacker, instead of Jamie and Sherwood, yes, your run defense is going to suffer somewhat. So that could be part of it. But a much bigger part of it is just not having that interior defensive line, which has been a problem as long as Salah's been here, really. But again, for a team that has aspirations of making at least a deep playoff run, it's something to think about. Hey, Bernard. Jetted out exactly right. It's that just issue. Now, Sluggo, you mentioned defending wheel routes and screens is something to watch. It's very interesting because Quincy actually did a very good job against wheel routes last year. Some of it was just pure speed rather than technique, meaning he was beaten over the top. A guy did stack him, but then he was just able to, there was a play. There were two particular plays. There was one against James Cook in the end zone in the first game of the season where Quincy caught up and pass deflection, and I don't think he even looked back. If I recall correctly, he didn't even look back for the pass. He played through the hands like Sauce does sometimes, which is pretty impressive for a linebacker on a running back who ran a 4.4. And then when you have screens, yes, the Jets definitely have a problem with screens at times. But screen passes as a whole are generally not overly efficient plays. So I'm not I'm more concerned with the dump off to the running back in the flat than I am with the screen pass necessarily. But yes, I agree. Again, the defensive tackles, that could be an issue also. They over pursue, and then the linebackers over pursue, and then you have very few. You have many blockers against very few defenders, which is always an issue. So yeah, this was definitely something the Jets defense struggled with more in 2022, especially the wheel routes. But it still definitely is something to look through for in the defense. Gyro, it's very interesting you mentioned the 4-3 versus the 3-4 because in many ways the 3-4 is a more flexible defense in that because the way the 3-4 is played. First of all, they play with many different alignments in terms of 3-4s are you'll play with two defensive linemen, two edge rushers, and then let's say the classic, the linebackers and the safeties. They play 3-3-5, they play 2-4-5, they play 2-3-6. There's a lot of different alignments. And the thing about the 3-4 also is that because you have edge defenders drop into coverage at times, on the one hand, it means you might have like a Jermaine Johnson or a Hassan Reddick type in coverage, which is not necessarily ideal when they're pass rushers first. But at the same time, it means that the offense doesn't necessarily know what's coming. Whereas with the Jets on most plays, they know that the edge defenders are coming. They may not know who else is coming, but they know that they pretty much know. Look, they dropped Jermaine sparingly. They dropped Huff primarily, a few times as a spy, but you pretty much know with the Jets that the edge rushers are coming and the two defensive tackles are coming. And that's what they almost always put on the field. It's just, either they have two interior defensive linemen, two edge rushers, two linebackers, three cornerbacks, and two safeties, or they have their four defensive linemen and three linebackers, two cornerbacks, two safeties, or they have their four defensive linemen, two linebackers, two cornerbacks, and three safeties. Those are pretty much the alignments they run. Yes, they run on the goal line. They run a few other ones. Sometimes they'll put on third down, they'll stick an edge rusher inside rather than playing two defensive tackles, on a pass only down. But for the most part, so it takes away a level of the confusion. And to take it a step further, because Salah and Ulbrich don't really disguise their defenses so much. They play buzz coverage sometimes and they, inverted things, but they tend not to. A lot of times they just play straight cover 4, or you can see that it's cover 4 before the snap, or cover 6. And so, in that sense, the 3-4 is certainly a 3-4 is easier to disguise. It's less predictable, but at the same time, the Jets want that for their defense. They don't want them to have to be thinking so much because that's really where the coverage breakdowns come down. If you watch the Jets compared to other defenses, they have very good back-end communication, Jordan Whitehead notwithstanding. They tend not to have so many coverage busts. And it's possible, certainly, that the 4-3, the simplistic coverage where they keep the cornerbacks on each side for the most part, they don't really have them travel. I know Sauce said he's going to travel more this year. I'll believe it when I see it. That kind of thing. It could be that it just makes it easier for them to communicate. And so, look, it's worked until now, so I'm not going to fault Saleh and Ulbrich for their scheme if it's worked. I have my doubts about it. I still think it's way too dependent on elite talent, but the Jets have elite talent. So I guess they can afford to do it then. They can afford to just say, go beat us. And again, if their pass rush is good enough, a lot of times it's like, you can't stop us. You know what's coming. You can't stop it. Again, when you have a Sauce Gardner and you have a DJ Reed and you have a Michael Carter, a lot of times you can do that. But I don't think they certainly shouldn't switch to the 3-4, but it is an interesting point that the 3-4 is a much more flexible kind of defense than the 4-3. And look, there have been success with, both. There's a reason both are run in the NFL. There have been successful defenses that run both types. Belichick always ran a 3-4. Rex Ryan ran a 3-4. But if you remember Rex Ryan, he was basically, everyone in his vaunted defenses, he basically had to blitz the farm on every play because he had no pass rushers. I'm sure that he would. I can't say I'm sure, but he would probably play differently if he had a Quinnen Williams and a Jermaine Johnson and a Hassan Reddick on his defensive line. They literally had no one who could get home, so he had to blitz the farm. So again, the way the Jets play is because they can afford to. Now, Bernard, you said, do you think Rodgers is injury prone? I don't think he's injury prone in the sense, if you look at his career, he's mostly been durable. He's had a couple of seasons where he got hurt. The thing is, any 40-year-old is injury prone. That's just the nature of the beast. Now, as a fan, I am very concerned that he's going to get injured. As an analyst, I don't see any reason to be more concerned that he would get injured than you would have been about Tom Brady at 40. Which, again, if you thought about Tom Brady at 40, I mean, I don't really hear too many people talk about him getting injured. Now, yes, Rodgers coming off an Achilles tear. Brady, what was it? Was it ACL or was it Achilles? I think it was his ACL that he tore in 08. I know that was a while before, but again, he did have a major injury. He came back none the worse for wear. And so, I'm in that sense, I don't think Rodgers is injury prone. Sluggo, as you said, the 4-3 has worked, so if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Gyro, I agree, the run D, but the thing is, I don't think the 3-4 is inherently. I understand the sentiment that the 3-4 is better at defending the run because a lot of times you have those three big defensive linemen, right? You have the nose tackle and the two defensive ends in addition to the edge rusher, so you have the three bigger bodies. But if anything, because the Jets play again, if you play 4-3 and you have more disciplined defensive linemen, there's no reason why a 4-3 should not be a good run defense. Again, each one has its strengths and weaknesses. Maybe the 4-3 on the whole is a little worse than that way, but I don't think. Also, if you're comparing the two parts of the game, pass defense and pass rush are so much more important than run defense. And so, in that sense, I still expect the Jets defense to be good. I'm not saying I expect it to be bad. I'm just saying that it could be an issue that has Jets fans tearing their hair out at certain points or in certain games. Joey, thanks. Sluggo, it'll be nice to get a 2-touchdown lead by the fourth quarter so the D-line can tee off on the quarterback. Look, I'm not saying it's going to happen every game. That is very unlikely to happen against Miami if Tua is healthy. Very unlikely to happen against Josh Allen, even if the Bills are not as good this year as in the past. But I don't know. When they're playing Arizona, they're playing Tennessee, they're playing New England, like some of these teams, it would be very nice to have a 2-touchdown lead and not to be trying to squeak out a, race to 20 points, as Saleh said. Ron, what are you confused about? Screens are a discipline play. Absolutely. And discipline is an issue for the Jets defense. They over-pursue, they overcommit, they just shoot gaps with the end in. You'd think that would be something, especially now going into year 4 of the same defense. You would think that they would kind of speak to their defensive linemen about being a little bit more disciplined, even in a penetrating defense, but they don't seem to care. It's like they're conceding the run game. They're like, ultimately, we don't care if you'll be. I mean, look, this is the Jets' defensive philosophy. This is Saleh and Ulbricht's philosophy. The way they see it is if you cannot beat us for chunk plays and you have to matriculate your way down the field, first down by first down, eventually you're going to make a mistake. So they're like, we don't care if we give you a field goal, because field goals are not going to beat us. I mean, they did when the Jets had no offense, but a team that has even a below average but not totally atrocious offense is not going to get beat by 4 field goals generally. What's going to beat you is touchdowns, especially quick touchdowns. So what they say is, if we don't allow explosive plays, we don't allow 20, 30-yard pass plays, we don't allow chunk plays, then we'll still win. And so they can see the run. They say, we don't care if you run for 12 yards a few times, because ultimately at some point you're going to run for 2 yards. because most run plays, the most common run plays in the NFL go for between 1 and 4 yards. So they say even if you rip off a few chunk plays, we're fine with that because ultimately you're going to run for that 1 or 2 yard gain. We're going to have you on second and long. Then we're going to have you on third. You'll pass on second down. We'll have you on third down. We'll get you where we want you. And eventually you're going to make a mistake. Either you're going to turn the ball over. You're going to be forced to punt. And the Jets are in that way content to play the field position game, which I don't love. And obviously as a fan, it drives you crazy to see them give up third downs because they play such a soft middle and they play, again, they don't really guard the flats. Like they play to rally to the flat, but it's work because they have players who play their position so well. And so again, yes, screens are a disciplined play. The Jets are not very disciplined. They over pursue. You would think, you watch if you watch Joe Blewett's review of Quinnen Williams, you watch Quinnen Williams on some plays where he just died. In general, his split second diagnosis of a play is really good, but particularly on screens, you watch him where he comes in, he sees he's not being blocked hard or not being double teamed, and he knows the screen is coming because he's double teamed at the highest rate in the NFL. And so, in that sense, yeah, Nick, as you were saying, yeah, it is a disciplined play and they have a discipline issue, but ultimately it just, they've gotten away with it. And so again, I as much as I don't like it, I wrote an article last off season talking about the pros and cons of Saleh's defense. I was talking about how screens are an issue, but ultimately I'd rather give up a few screens every day than give up 20 plus yard pass plays, and the Jets give up the fewest of those in the NFL. And so I think ultimately they're kind of making that trade-off, and it's a worthwhile trade-off. Slogo, Quincy has filled in nicely for the loss of Quan. He's probably faster in covering the field. So Quincy's not really a Quan replacement because if you recall, if anything, Quan was the third linebacker. Quincy was still on the field. Quincy was the starter in their nickel set. Quan was their third linebacker when they played base. They played a lot more base in 2022. What they did in 2023 is rather than replacing Quan Alexander, Sherwood took on that role when they played base, but they just didn't play it that often. Sherwood only got 193 snaps all season. What they did was they played nickel most of the time. They played it the second highest rate in the NFL. So there were two ways they played nickel. Either they played it with just traditional nickel with three corners, your two outside corners in your slot corner, or they played it where they put a safety on the field for a big nickel, which they hadn't done as much in the previous year. They did a little bit with Will Parks, but for the most part, they hadn't done it much. They did it much more with earlier in the season. They did it with Adrian Amos, and then later in the year with Ashton Davis. Although Davis was in there early in the season, but they did it. Again, you had Whitehead and Adams, and then you had Davis on the field also. Davis almost played like that sub linebacker role, played in the box a lot or in the slot, did not really play deep that much. And so I anticipate I'm not sure how they're going to do it. I anticipate that they're going to do what they did more of last year, like that they're going to play again. They're going to play a lot of big nickel. I imagine that Ashton will continue playing the sub linebacker role. So far from what I understand, the Chuck Clark and Tony Adams took all the starting reps in OTAs, and so it seems to me like Saleh saying that there was a safety competition in training camp was just to maybe mollify Ashton, but not really anything legitimate. But I assume Ashton is going to play that linebacker role. But Quincy just improved himself, meaning the Quincy in 2022 and the Quincy in 2023 were totally different players. The Quincy, and look, Quincy still has his issues. He still misses a lot of tackles. He still, takes risks in coverage. But still, the plays that we saw him make on the ball, the way he covered tight ends and running backs was a huge difference for the Jets offense. Now, again, tight ends were an issue primarily because of Jordan Whitehead. But when you saw Quincy, he made a play again on Noah. I think it was on Noah Gray against Kansas City. Not that Noah Gray is Travis Kelce, but again, it was a good play. He made some very nice plays against running backs and tight ends in coverage. And so, again, if Quincy can keep that up, the Jets defense is in very good shape. That was one thing I was not expecting. I have to say, and I give Saleh and Ulbrich a ton of credit for Quincy's development because no one could have predicted that the waiver wire scrap heap player who literally was just shot out of a cannon but couldn't, actually play would become this player. And if anything, now that's why I think Zaire Barnes might make the team. I think that they see him as a Quincy type player. Again, sideline to sideline speed, shot out of a cannon, hits really hard, can't tackle to save his life, has limited awareness and coverage, but again, you take that athleticism and you harness it, you get a Quincy. So yeah, but I'm just saying Quincy didn't really replace Quan. He just filled in for his own role in nickel extremely well. I say safety play was partly to blame too when it came to the run defense. Our safety was over aggressive, running into blocks instead of waiting for a good gap. No, absolutely, absolutely, and that's I recently wrote an article about one reason the Jets. There are a couple reasons the Jets defense could get better, and one of the things I said was Chuck Clark replacing Jordan Whitehead, because Clark is a very conservative run defender, but that's exactly what the Jets need. Again, if we're talking about the big issue with the Jets is giving up chunk plays in the exactly what you need is a safety who takes good angles and, let's say, prevents a 7-yard gain from turning into a 20-yard gain, or prevents a 5-yard gain from turning into a 15-yard gain, whether it's by missing a tackle or just by being over aggressive and shooting up. Now, Tony Adams still has that issue, and if it's Tony Adams in that spot, you're still going to see him miss tackles, or just you see it all the time. The running back's heading outside, and he comes down on a he takes a very shallow angle, or like he takes a very steep angle towards the ball, and the ball carrier just runs right past him. Now, Quincy does that a lot too, but the difference is Quincy is shooting in the backfield, so it's a little different. When you're doing it when your running back's already 5 yards past the line of scrimmage, scrape over the top and tackle him. Don't worry so much about getting your hard hit in. And that's exactly what Chuck Clark does, and that's why I do think Chuck Clark will be a major upgrade over Jordan Whitehead. Honestly, I think if last year, the truth is, look, if Clark hadn't gotten hurt, I think Clark would have been playing the Ashton Davis role. I think they were planning on playing big nickel and starting Adams, Whitehead, and Clark, or alternatively starting Clark and Whitehead together. But if it had been Whitehead who got hurt last year instead of Clark, you would have seen a much better run defense. Okay, Rafa, I appreciate the sentiment. Good evening, Curly. Do you know the defensive play formation percentage from last year from nickel to 4-3? You need a good run defensive safety running the nickel formation. So the Jets played nickel, I believe 86% of, I might be wrong. That might have just been I think they played nickel 86% of the time last year. Now, it's hard to say how much they played 4-3 because what happens is all the tracking sites listed as a 3-4 rather than a 4-3 because Jermaine Johnson and Bryce Huff were listed as outside linebackers last year. Johnson is still listed as an outside linebacker. They did it for Johnson in order to for him to be able to change his number to 11. And also, I guess they stood them up more often, so they were officially more like 3-4 linebackers. So it's hard to know how much they actually ran a 4-3, but I believe they ran nickel 86% of the time last year. And so, yeah, you do need a good run defensive safety. The thing is, as Robbie Sabo has pointed out, when Tony Adams first came in, I thought that he was going to be the deep safety. He was going to be a free safety, roam the deep part of the field. And honestly, they play so much quarters anyway that, I thought they both played deep. But the truth is, Adams only played deep on 41% of his snaps, and Whitehead did more, I think 50 or above. And so if you think about it, Clark is really coming in to replace Whitehead as the deep safety, in which case Adams is the box safety. And if Adams is the box safety, it's Adams who you need to be the really good run defense safety. And while Adams, like Whitehead, makes more impact plays in the run game than Clark does, he also misses a lot more tackles. And it's an issue. I mean, it's an issue coming from deep also. We saw him. I mean, some of the biggest run defense plays, the worst plays the Jets gave up last year were because one or both of the safeties took a bad angle to tackle. And so, I mean, you're definitely right, Jedediah. Dakota, yes, let's go Jets. Sluggo, teams will try short game RD. No one will want to come out throwing on the secondary. They always do. And look, it's very interesting. I always thought that Patrick Mahomes was going to beat the Jets that way because he switched his mentality earlier in his career. He's a gunslinger, and then already over the last couple of years, his average of target was one of the lowest among NFL quarterbacks. He was dinking and dunking downfield with Rashee Rice and Kelsey, and really not throwing deep that often. And so the thing about Mahomes is that he can dink and dunk better than any other quarterback in the NFL. Notwithstanding, again, he didn't have a great 2023 regular season, but in general, he dinks and dunks better than any other quarterback, where he's just not going to make, he can dink. He's like, you want me to dink and dunk? I'll dink and dunk you straight for a touchdown. And ultimately, early in the Chiefs game, it looked like that was happening. They were down 17-0. But ultimately, in that game, I mean, Mahomes did it to himself to an extent. He just threw ridiculous interceptions he literally threw on right to Ashton Davis, where it was like, hello, he's right there. Why are you throwing that ball? And he threw another one to CJ Mosley into double coverage, and he threw, and I mean, he should have had a third one, right? If not for the bogus holding call on Sauce. And so the Jets had forced Mahomes into one of his worst games of the season. And but one of the reasons I think is because he wanted to push the ball downfield and he just couldn't. And so, and especially when you have Quincy playing the shorter area of the field better than he did previously, it's really not easy to dink and dunk. And yeah, again, the Jets are like, you want to short game us? Go ahead. At some point, you're going to make a mistake and you're going to either turn the ball over or you're going to have to punt. And the Jets are like perfectly happy to let teams gain 5 yards at a time. They're like, go ahead, gain 5 yards. We don't care. And because they're like, ultimately, you're going to make a mistake on one play, and then we have you right where we want you. Ralph, I appreciate it. Defense will be fine. Needed offense since 2015. Forget about since 2015. I don't remember a single season since I started following the Jets in 2004 where their offense was okay. Maybe in 2015. I basically can't remember a single season where their offense was better than their defense. I mean, some seasons they just had atrocious on both sides of the ball, but every year, like they've had some good defenses. They never really had, for the most part, like an above average offense. And again, and even in 2015, yes, they had obviously Fitzpatrick to Marshall and Decker was a very good connection. But the truth is they played an extremely easy schedule that season. And that wasn't really going to be replicable. Ayahuasca has healing properties. It does. Look, I think that Rodgers' ability to heal has more to do with the discipline he has with his body, than and what he eats and how he keeps himself in shape than anything to do with ayahuasca. I think ayahuasca probably, if it's anything that you take, it's for the mind and for, to clear your head. It's used a lot for mental health. And so, but again, I guess you could say that. Which I found that funny. What is ayahuasca? It's a mind altering substance. So it's kind of like, I don't know if you've heard of, shrooms or some of these other things. It's a mind altering substance. I don't even know I'm not sure if is it legal. It might be illegal in some states. It might have once been completely illegal in the U.S. Now it's legal again. There were certainly restrictions on these kinds of substances for many years, from like 1970 to 2000 for sure. But yeah, it's a mind-altering substance. It's sort of, I guess, if used recreationally, people can overdose on it. But it's supposed to, again, people say if you have an out-of-body experience, you come back, you feel different. You feel. People have said that they feel, they felt, healed from a lot of whatever stuff they were dealing with. They have a clearer mind, whatever it is. So Roger subscribes to that. Okay. Ralph, I appreciate that. Gyro, yeah, I wrote an article about their flag issue, especially, it's an issue across the board. Obviously, holding and holding could continue to be an issue, unfortunately, because John Simpson is a very penalty-prone offensive lineman, and so was Joe Tippmann last year. But hopefully they can rein in the false starts, and really hopefully they can rein in the personal fouls, the unnecessary roughness. Quincy, Jermaine Johnson. I mean, Johnson was called for like an atrocious one. I don't remember if it was against the Giants or the Chiefs, or maybe it was both, where like he just came in and piled on for absolutely no reason. JFM was called for a stupid roughing the passer against Dallas, but he also had one he almost got away with against the Chargers, against Herbert, where he sacked him, but he like threw him down. Quinnen was called for a really dumb roughing the passer on Jalen Hurts. Totally unnecessary. Just like pushed him like 3 steps after. They really need to stop lowering the crown of their helmet. If there's anyone who's going to be called for a hip drop tackle, it's going to be Quincy Williams, right? Like you just know it's coming. Like be prepared for Quincy Williams to be called for that 3 times this season. But yeah, the flags it's definitely an issue. I mean, some of them are so costly. I mean, some of them are bogus. Sauce was called for a couple of absolutely ridiculous. The one against Kansas City, and there was one against Houston. It was like Noah Brown literally pushed off on him. Like, what kind of call was that? But the flags are definitely an issue. Jets 12-5. I mean, look, so far that's my prediction. We'll see if we still stick. So there aren't many good quarterbacks we face this coming year. Obviously, you have to place Josh Allen twice. Tua, as much as you want to knock Tua in that offense, he's a good quarterback. Same for Brock Purdy. They might not be elite quarterbacks, but they're in elite offenses. And then you have CJ Stroud, who, it's so funny. Everyone is so ready to crown CJ Stroud a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. I saw how he played against the Jets last year. And honestly, I predicted it. I have to say it's one of my prouder predictions going into a game last year. I had written an article saying exactly why CJ Stroud could struggle against the Jets. And exactly the reasons I said was what happened. He struggled under pressure. He struggled because he couldn't throw the deep ball. He likes to throw deep, and the Jets and he couldn't throw deep against the Jets, and then he was lost. Yes, could he go shorter to Stephon Diggs and Nico Collins? Yeah, he can. But ultimately, I would not be shocked if CJ Stroud takes a step back this year. I don't mean a major step back, but I'm just, again, maybe not. Maybe he cements himself as a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. But I just wouldn't be shocked, especially since the Texans are a popular Super Bowl pick, and I just don't think their defense is good enough to get there. Plus, Joe Mixon is very overrated, and their offensive line has more holes, especially if they decide to start Kenyon Green at guard. And Titus Howard at tackle could be an issue, too. Anyways, Buffalo 10-7, Dolphins 10-7. I do think Miami is going to be a bigger challenge for the Jets than Buffalo this year, but I could be wrong. I think that we are a little bit underestimating how good Josh Allen is, and we're also underestimating the fact that the Bills have one of the best cornerback trios in the NFL. Yes, the Jets have better, but still, they could really blanket the Jets offense, and they've had a really good run defense too for a while. And even despite all the names they lost, a lot of those names were declining anyway. And so I don't necessarily think that's going to replacing Trey White is not going to be very hard for them. New England 6-11 or 7-10. I could see New England 4-13, to be honest. So it's interesting. You say you're glad you got McCaffrey, Kittle, and the Niners first week. Yes, it definitely will be a litmus test, but I would have, and in one sense, hopefully they reach that week as healthy as they're going to be all season. But by the same token, I would have preferred to warm up first and have a few easy games, like start out week 1 against like Tennessee or Arizona, some stupid game. I like winning week 1. And so, especially if it's in San Francisco, it's not my favorite game to start. I really would have liked to start out with a win. And I unfortunately, I'm just not very convinced they're going to win that game. So, I'm not thrilled about it. But on the flip side, you get it out of the way, and then you don't have to worry about it for the rest of the season. So the Jets or Dolphins will win the East. Definitely could happen. Referring to Quan's ability to cover ground. Yes, that could be definitely that Quincy became the linebacker who could just cover a ton of ground. Yes, Quan definitely had this sideline to sideline speed, and Quincy became that linebacker who could cover better. Yes, I agree with that, Slugger. I'm not concerned that Solomon Thomas is behind me. Well, honestly, I have to say I was just going through my photos to try to find a virtual background, and Solomon Thomas was the only image that I had that was actually in a Jets uniform, because I have Javon Kinlaw and Lucky Fotu in their old team's uniform. So I put Solomon Thomas behind me. And yes, this stream was supposed to be about defensive tackles. If you look at the name of it. So I have Solomon Thomas behind me. I mean, he looks more pumped than angry. Joe Fluid. I didn't realize that who that was. No, Fluid, I'm not concerned at all. I put it there because the title of the stream was the Jets defensive tackle situation. Guys, make sure to tune in to Fluid and Sabo tomorrow. They're doing an all 22 roster building where they basically draft players, and then at the end you guys vote on which team is better. Should be very interesting actually to see who they draft. Because obviously some of the players are going to go early, like, Sauce, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, Quinnen Williams, Rodgers, they'll go quickly. But then after that, it'll be interesting, like, who prefers Jermaine Johnson or Hassan Reddick? I think Reddick will go well before Jermaine Johnson. How you draft some of the other players, who's the receiver, how you draft the receivers. Obviously, Mike Williams would probably be number 2, but then how that goes, how you draft the running backs should be interesting. What time, Joe? I think it was it 1 o'clock? I don't remember what time it is. Joe, if you're still here, it's 12. Okay, 12 noon, noon Eastern time. So they seem to do a little more zone blitzing on third downs this past season, bringing those defensive backs and dropping the defensive ends or defensive tackles off. It seems to be the one wrinkle that Ulbrich isn't afraid to roll out. So I never counted how much it happened. I noticed it a few times a game, not more than that. I guess that's more than they did in the past. It could be they also played more zone on third down, which they used to play man on third down all the time. So it could be they did. They definitely switched it up more. Like, meaning they stood up JJ in the A gap or the B gap. They they moved Huff inside a few times. They did definitely do some other things, but I still didn't think it was a significant thing. Again, if you're saying third down, if there are obvious pass rushing situations, you're doing it a few times a game. That's still more than they did it before. Rafa, I love the 12-5 record. I've been around for 50 years. I'm zippered up. Usually I would be rallying around the team, but after last year, I'm done. This is the thing. After the end of last season, I was like, oh my God, I'm so done on this team. I mean, I cover them, but like as a fan, I'm so done. And then, they pull you back in, especially they made some moves this offseason I really liked. And they just, you feel like, and then you hear from Robbie Savo during OTAs that Rodgers is still slinging the ball around like he did before. And it's like, they pull you in, and this year they got a real offensive line, and you're like, if everything goes right, of course, you know how the Jets work, but you can't help but hope. That's just the story of a sports fan. The Jets D gets hurt more in zone. Why do you think that is, Sluggo? Yeah, high noon it is. If the Jets team clicks and stays healthy, we're 14-3. I'm certainly not ruling that out as a possibility. I don't think it's likely. I think to me, their ceiling probably is 13 wins. I think they're going to go 12-5 or 11-6. I'm more inclined towards 12-5 right now. We'll see what my actual prediction is before the season starts. But we'll see what happens. But again, 14-3, it's not, it's not out of the realm of the possibility that the Jets just come out offensively and put up points, a lot of points every game. And if they come out with a lead, they are going to be very hard to play, like San Francisco and Baltimore were last year. Again, those teams played with a lead most of the time, and they blew out their opponents. And so their defenses didn't really have to work very hard. And if the Jets can get, I'm not saying that the Jets have the kind of offensive talent that the 49ers do, but they have a couple of really high-end, even just Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson. If Rodgers is on and the offensive line is on, those they can, between Hall and Garrett Wilson, you could see 3,500 yards. 3,500 all-purpose yards, 2,000 for Breece, 1,500 for Garrett Wilson. I'm not saying that's my prediction. It's not. I think Breece will get close to 2,000. I don't think he'll get quite there. I think Garrett Wilson will have in the 1,300s receiving yards. But even that, let's say Breece has 1,850 yards and Garrett has 1,300. That's 3,150 yards. And so just between two players. And so, again, I'm not totally discounting it. Mahomes' middle name is Dink. It certainly wasn't when he first came in. Do you think Rodgers can change his game? What about his game do you think he needs to change, Bernard? Is it to be more of a pocket passer? He's really, even though he does, roll out, he is still a pocket passer. Like, it's not like he was ever he's been a scrambler for the last 5 years at least. The one thing I am a little concerned to see is if he's going to start trying to make plays happen with his legs rather than throwing it away or dumping it off, because he did like to do that with the Packers. He liked to try to get out of the pocket. But Robbie Sabo reassured me a few weeks ago when I had him on that he thinks Rodgers is smart and he's not going to get himself hurt. Sluggo, I'm 66 and we've never had a quarterback like Rodgers even at 40. Picture Namath with good knees. Yeah, look, I didn't see Namath play, but I totally know in my lifetime they've never even had anything close. How much do you think the Jets taking two running backs has to deal with the new kickoff rules and formations? I think it has almost nothing to do with it because I don't see either one of them returning kickoffs. Meaning, if either one of them had returned kicks in the past, then I would say totally. But neither one has. And so I don't see it. I don't think it has anything to do with the kickoff rules. Sluggo, you said Kansas City interference call on Sauce was borderline rigged by ref. I know Joe Bullock keeps saying that. He's like, the refs need Patrick Mahomes to win, and so they called that pass interference on Sauce. They called holding, actually, but what was ridiculous about the call, it's not the only time I've seen it, but it's so ridiculous, is the ref literally threw the flag after the pass was intercepted. If you're calling holding, you should not be throwing the flag after the ball was already gotten. You throw the flag right when you saw the hold. And that was what was so bogus about it. It's like one thing if you called a PI, fine, you called a PI, you threw it right when the ball got, because, within seconds, you pulled it out right when the ball got there. But a holding penalty should not have been thrown right when the ball got out. It's like the ref just saw it was intercepted and then decided to call the flag. So, yeah, absolutely. Am I a Jets fan? What do you think, based on the way I'm talking? Do you think I'm a Jets fan or not? I'm going to wait for the response. If you guys have any more comments, you can post them. I'll wait a few more minutes. If not, I'm going to end the stream. I'm not going to necessarily go 2 hours all the time because it's a little much, especially on Sunday nights. It's hard to tell. Why is it hard to tell, do you think, Bernard? I don't think it's hard to tell, but if you think it's hard to tell, I consider that a compliment. Hi, Tyson. I think I'm the only lady here as far as I know. But thanks for joining. We're winding down, so if you have any questions or comments, you can put them in the chat. We were talking about the defense. We talked about the defensive tackles and the run defense, and then people were just giving questions and comments. Bernard, I'm a Jets fan. I've been a Jets fan since technically I've been a Jets fan since I was born because my grandfather made me one. I started following the Jets when I was 5. I was 5 years old and my brother was 4, and my brother asked my grandfather, "What's Quebec?" My grandfather laughed. And when I was 8 years old, 8 and 9, it was the first year I started following fully every game and really following what was going on. And so, yeah, I've been a Jets fan since 2004 in terms of like fully following and knowing what's going on. Yeah, I'm a big Jets fan. Well, I appreciate that, but I think I say enough things that make you know that I'm a Jets fan. It's just that I try to, when I answer questions, I try to answer them like an analyst, not like a fan. It doesn't mean I'm not a fan. And when I watch a game, I'm as much of a fan as anyone else. I scream at the screen, and I get frustrated. And yeah, if you listen to the recording of me watching games, it sounds like any other Jets fan. But again, I can't do that as an analyst, or no one would want to listen to me. Good night. Good night. John, thanks for joining. Yeah, so I guess thanks so much for joining. I appreciate it. I'll wait a couple more minutes just to see if there are any other questions or comments. Thanks so much to people who join every time I post a stream. I really appreciate it. I'm trying to get my presence on YouTube and in Jets content in general a little bit more out there. And so anyone who joins, I really appreciate it. Thanks, Bernard. I appreciate that. Okay, I think I'm going to call it a night now, but thank you so much for joining. Please remember to subscribe to Jets X Factor. Please remember to check out jetsxfactor.com every day. We put out great content. You find really original content there. And look, I honestly, when I joined Jets X Factor, I felt lucky to join because I joined a place where you're really trying to put out like original content and not just the same stuff that you see everywhere else. You'll see some of the regular columns, but then the analysis that we put out is like really in depth. You got Joe Blewett with his film reviews. You get Michael Nanny and me with the analytics. You got Robbie Sabo with the film breakdowns. Robbie's also on with Wayne Corbett every week on the Underdog Jets podcast. I'm here. I'm on the Scoreboard podcast. I'm trying to stream every Sunday, although I think next week I will. In 2 weeks I won't. But you can check out the Scoreboard podcast. You could watch on YouTube. Check it out wherever you get your podcasts. I'm on Spotify, Apple Music, and then from there everywhere else. And thank you so much for joining, everyone. If you could please leave a like and a comment, I would really appreciate it. Thank you. Take care. Have a great night.